This is J. Krishnamurti's 7th public talk in Saanen, 1969.
This is the last talk, and on Sunday there will be the discussions or dialogues. What shall we talk about this morning? Talk about relationship.
About awareness.
About the difficulty of seeing oneself. About action.
Do all those things and be quiet for an hour.
And be quiet for an hour. Perhaps all these questions might be answered if we consider what is of essential importance. What is it that is creating in us and outside of us in the world such havoc? What is it that in relationship, in action, in almost everything that we put our hand to, turns out to a confusion, a struggling, continuous misery? What is it that is the center of all disturbance, of all contention? What is it that prevents us from being quiet 5 minutes, an hour? Or what is the necessity of being quiet at all? And what is it that prevents us from looking at ourselves very deeply? Or even perhaps casually, superficially? I think if we could answer all these questions by a single inquiry, perhaps these questions can be answered. What is the central disturbing factor in our life? Is it the environment in which we live? The social, economic culture? The tradition? The establishment, the organized religions outside of us? Are they the factor of this deep disturbance, deep battle in oneself and outside of us? if we could, this morning, could go into that factor, then perhaps we might be able to answer every other question for ourselves. If you have observed, most organized societies and religions have either encouraged the factor, this factor, or not being able to deal with it, have offered an escape, a reward in heaven, or a punishment as hell. What is this central issue that one can really understand and dissolve and perhaps bring about in oneself a harmony, a sense of deep understanding of this whole problem of living, in which relationship, action, love and everything are included. Can we uncover for ourselves what this factor is? Not intellectually, not merely verbally, but actually see what it is, as you would see this thing before your eyes, visually. See it so actually, so intimately, so that in the very perception of it, one can begin to see the structure and the nature of it. You know, if there was no division, would there be uniformity? Division between human beings. If there was no separation as you and me, we and they, the cultured, the uncultured, the elite and the not elite, if there was no this destructive, callous division, would all life, would all expression be uniform? And why is it that we have this division? And perhaps this division of being quiet for an hour, this division in relationship, this division between the me and the thing that I observe, and the difficulty that arises in observation, the division between love and hate, What is this basic, fundamental cause of this division? I think it is important to not only question ourselves, ask ourselves of this question, but also in the very serious asking of it, discover for ourselves the root cause of it. You understand, we are talking of the psychological division. Not the mere physical division, the woman and the man, the heavens and the earth, the ugly and the beautiful. The psychological difference, the separation, this sense of isolated entity. If we could look into it, then would there be a separation in relationship, which doesn't mean all relationships must be uniform, and perhaps that division between the action and the actual action and what should be the right action. The division between the obvious nationalities, I'm not talking, that's all fairly obvious, but the division between me and the thing I want to achieve, aspire to, gain, achieve. If we could go into this question rather deeply, then perhaps we might dissolve this division, this separation of inward space and isolation. What do we think is the cause of it? Don't please jump to a conclusion. Don't say just thought is this, it is that. But to, in the very asking of it, to find out. I'm asking myself what this division is, why it comes into being. Because I can see when there is no division, there is quite a different feeling. There is quite a different activity going on. When I ask myself how this comes into being, not only at the moment, why throughout history and throughout millions of years, this division has been going on between violence and peace, between hate and love, evil and good, this judgment and opinion, this constant state of assertion, which takes different forms. What is the origin of it in myself? Is it the education that I have had? The quality of the people I have lived with? Or the lack of quality of the people with whom I have spent many years? Is it that there has been no need to worry about money, security, outwardly? Please do ask these questions of yourself as the speaker is asking of it himself. Is it that he has been protected and therefore he looks at life without fragmentation? Is it because he is particularly endowed with perception and therefore no conflict? Is it because this separation comes into being of his thought, of his desire? If one attributes or gives cause to the outward environment, economic, social, cultural, heredity, tradition, then by altering the outer conditions, breaking down the economic society, the economic way of life, then one would have obviously this sense of non-division, non-separateness. Is that so? Is it so easy as change the environment where everybody has enough food, clothes and shelter, where there is freedom and not tyranny? Will this division, separateness, this self-centered activity come to an end by altering the outer condition, the outer structure? Will this inward sense of separateness, division, come to an end? Or it has nothing whatsoever to do with the environment at all? Going to have good clothes, good education, good food, comfortable place to live, money assured and all the rest of it, good job, And by having all that, will the inward sense of non-isolation, division come to an end? It may modify, it may culturally, outwardly give me a certain polish, a certain way of dealing with the problems. It may help me to have a better brain, a better standard, pattern, a quality. But will this inward sense of self-importance, inward sense of achievement, separateness, this battle between the opposing desires, this anxiety, fear, will that also come to an end when everything outwardly is well established? Or that inward sense of self-isolating action has nothing whatsoever to do with the outer? And therefore, can this inward psychological barrier, resistance, isolation, the pursuit of a particular comparative achievement, will that come to an end by any form of outward stimulation, outward encouragement, outward pattern of a society in which one may live? If the outward conditioning has nothing whatsoever to do with this destructive, meaningless way of living. Oh Lord, there's the train. Then how is this? This division that brings about anger, this deep sense of pride, arrogance, violence, how is all that to be dealt with? And all these attributes, all these states of division, is there not one cause for it all, the one central root of it? And if one could get at that center root and not merely everlastingly prune the various roots, but get to the very center root, And is there such a central root? And that's our inquiry this morning. Not intellectual or verbal, but actually to ask oneself if there is, in the understanding of one central root, all the other problems are solved. I think there is. That central root, as far as one can see in oneself, is this me, the I, the ego, the self. Which, in its very activity, in all relationships, is isolating itself all the time. This isolating, self-centered activity is creating this division as the me and the not me, the high and the low. The high being whatever that height is, culturally or religiously, or given a certain attitude of what one considers the spiritual. And the low is the opposite of all that. In this self-centered activity, in this isolating process, relationship is the me and the you, and hence a division. And such a self-centered activity can never cooperate. It will accept cooperation according to its particular self-centered activity or quality. But it will never understand what it is to cooperate. And also when it is not to cooperate. Because cooperation cooperation must be understood first, deeply. Then only is it possible to understand when it is not, when there must be no cooperation. And this isolation, this self-centered movement is not only obvious outwardly, its expression in words, in action, in behavior, that one can observe very easily. But at the deeper level, mostly hidden, there the potency of this activity overcomes any resolution, outward resolution. Right? One can see this very clearly. And can this self-centered activity, which involves violence, fulfillment, and therefore aggression, resistance and therefore hate and fear, these are all the qualities of this self-centered action. Opinion, judgment, evaluation, and so on. And can I see it so completely as a whole, not take fragment by fragment? And if I took it by fragment, I'll have no time. Life is too short. Anything might happen when I leave the tent. So, without examining each fragment, can the mind see this whole structure, the nature of it in its entirety immediately? And if I say that is the main issue, please follow this little bit. If I say to myself, my main issue is I must see it immediately, because I have no time. I can't go by fragment by fragment. But then if you say I must understand it immediately, then you are blocking yourself. And the perception of its entirety is only possible when you understand that the fragmentation, the examination of each fragmentation, the analysis of each division is utterly meaningless when you really, deeply, profoundly understand that. Then you may come to the other. But to say I must understand it completely, immediately, wholly, is just childish play. It's like the man who says, I won't go through the examination or uncover the whole structure of myself, but I suddenly want to find myself in heaven. So I'm asking myself, which is yourself, you understand, which is yourself. And there is great beauty in that. I am asking myself and therefore asking you, if I can see the whole nature of it, and if the mind cannot see the whole of it, what am I to do? You understand my question? Here I am, a human being with various cultural, economic, social, personal relationships, all broken up, divided, fragmented. There is fear, there is anxiety, there is hurt, a grudge, remembrances, the loneliness. the desire to achieve, pride, and the striving after something. All that is me. The violence, the occasional expression of tenderness, impatience, brutality, aggression, and so on. All that is me. And that is breeding this self-centered division. My family, my money, all that. And by taking one at a time, like violence, and going to it so completely, being aware of it, wholly, then perhaps I will see the whole nature of self-centered activity. And the question then is, how is this mind to look at violence, hate, prejudice, opinion, judgment, particular or general fears, personal sorrow or the sorrow of the world? How is the mind to look at it? So that in the very observation of it, there is no division, and hence no conflict. Right? You understand? Can I go on now? Are we in communication with each other? How am I the mind which is you as well as the me? How is that mind to look so that in the very looking at this obvious and subtle forms of division, with all its variance as violence, pleasure, love, hate, jealousy, anxiety and sorrow, how is it to look without this division? How can I look at myself, which is yourself, without the observer who creates the evaluation and based on that, resistance or acceptance, denial or rejoicing in what it is? Can the mind look without the observer? The observer being this whole self-centered activity. And man throughout the world has not been able to do it. Therefore, he wants an outside agency to help him. God, or the state, or the book, and so on. And in the very asking of that help, he is escaping from the actual fact. So, can this mind, which is you as well as me, can that mind look at this whole self-centered activity without giving itself an attitude, giving to itself an evaluation, giving it to itself a certain position from which it looks and observes? If it can look without this sense of separateness, which is the word, the symbol, the opinion, and so on, then is there a division between the various fragments at all? And therefore, there is only the state of observation. And therefore, in that state, no division. This, if one can use the word, is the way of religious life. And we are using that word, though perhaps some of you may not like that word, because in it there are various overtones. That word is loaded and has become so ugly. To live a life so completely inwardly harmonious, a life in which there is no conflict, therefore no division, unless there is the life of that kind in me, which is you, there can be no perception of what all the human beings have sought. Because human beings have sought what they consider God, truth, the ultimate, the state of innocency, because their own life is so empty, shoddy, meaningless. And therefore they have been forced to invent or accept or out of their fear believe a supreme state. But if there is an observation without division, and that state is absolutely, it seems to me, essential. Not theoretically, but actually in the mind, in the heart, which is you and me, then only whatever there is, which cannot possibly be invited or invented or be an illusion, then that thing can come into being. But before that can come, there must be a deep sense of inward observation, in which there is no division. The speaker has said what he wanted to say. Now can we talk over together what has been said? How do I maintain the state of wholeness, the state in which there is no division? I may feel it now, sitting here in this tent, perhaps persuaded or stimulated by you, the speaker, and when I go out, that state fades away. And the questioner says, how am I to maintain it? Right?
Come upon it again.
Yes, come upon it again. Ask for it. Maintain it. Wait for it. Expect it. Don't. It's very simple, isn't it? Don't. If you have had it once, that's good enough. Don't be greedy. No, sir. It's very important to understand. If you had it once and want it again, perhaps not want it, but expect it, wait for it, hope for it, be with open mind and arms, waiting, all the rest of it. Then the remembrance of what has been will prevent for the new to be. So you can never maintain it, never sustain it. All that one can do is to leave the window open for the fresh air to come in. But you must keep the window open and not wait or hope that it will come through the window. You have no window, no fresh air. There must be this sense of complete observation. Why is sorrow so fundamental? First it exists. Whether you are rich or poor, whether you are brilliant intellectually or dull-witted, it exists. Not only this aching personal immediate sorrow, but the enormous sorrow of the world, which doesn't mean that one becomes miserable, but one observes it to be a fact. And you're asking, why is it so fundamental? Why does man suffer? Right? Why do I and you suffer? The I being you. Why do we suffer? What does suffering mean? Not intellectually, for God's sake, that has no word, there's no me. If you say what does it mean intellectually, you look up in a dictionary, it'll tell you. But what does it mean in your heart? In your heart, therefore it is my heart. What does it mean? The sorrow of not being loved, the sorrow of loneliness, the sorrow of never understanding, the sorrow of having no capacity, the sorrow of seeing somebody extraordinarily beautiful, clear, full of delight, and you compare yourself and say, I can never come to that. And in that there is sorrow. The sorrow of loss of another, whom you think one loves. There is this basic, enormous burden. And will it ever end? Or must we everlastingly bear till we die? And not being able to solve it, we resort to all kinds of tricks. Drink, drugs, sex, knowledge, brilliance, intellectually, verbally, very clever. But it is there. And is it possible to end it?
Sir?
Wait, sir. Un momento, sir. I am... I don't know. Is it possible to end it? Don't you ask that question yourself, sir, before you ask your question? How do I, and therefore you, how do I end this sorrow? Tears, ache, and all the rest of it. How am I to get beyond all this? Is there a way? Is there a system? They offer you ways and system to overcome, to suppress, to worship sorrow. But it's there. So, what another offers cannot resolve it. Doesn't matter who the other is. Because the other is you. He thinks he has overcome sorrow, but it may be his escape. He is deluding himself. So there is sorrow. How is that burden to be put aside? Will you tell me? Can I look to somebody else? So, there it is. And it isn't a child's game. This requires a very serious mind. A mind not brilliant, mind that is very awake, watching. There is no how to keep awake. When you are thirsty, you drink water. When the house is burning, you try to put it out. You don't ask how. There it is. And I don't know what to do. Shall I walk with it always? Knowing that to think is to be full of sorrow. So I have to begin at the very source of my being, at the very root of my being. Because there is the root of sorrow. The very root of my being is this me, the self. And that gives birth to sorrow, and there is no ending of sorrow unless the me, the I, comes to an end, and it can only end not by thought, by volition, by determination, by escape, by understanding the whole structure and nature of the me. Yes, sir?
Well, you just answered my question.
Oh, tant mieux. What, sir? I don't quite understand what you're saying, sir.
I'm just saying that to contradict yourself to a very basic point.
I'm not trying to stop you, sir, but I don't quite understand what you're saying.
I say that you say that the basic reason for feeling the great depression of sorrow is the world's sorrow. The sorrow you feel in the world, because you cannot be sure that anybody feels like yourself about personal sorrow if you're feeling that way.
Qu'est-ce que... As somebody, would you explain to me?
So, point is that if man should stand alone, in that case, how could you at the same time?
I see what you mean. I get it, sir. I understand what you mean. At least I think I do. You are saying, aren't you, please correct me if I'm wrong, you are saying, how can you, who say that you must be alone, how can you at the same time talk about the sorrow of the world, right?
Yes, and the sorrow of the world being the main program.
Yes, sir, yes, sir, yes. I wonder if we understand the meaning of that word, both you and I, what it is to be alone, not physically, but psychologically, inwardly, to be alone. What does it mean? And is it possible to be so completely alone? Because I and you are the result of our conditioning. Memories, ideas, culture, religion, economic pressures, and so on and on and on. Unless one understands all that, all the nature and the structure of that, rather, in the very understanding of that, you need to be very clear, uncluttered, and therefore understand it. I mean that, to be alone in that sense, the mind is fresh, young, and clear. Now you say, can such a mind, which is alone, understand the sorrow of the world? To be so alone, it must have understood not only the sorrow of the particular, but also the sorrow of the world, which is not the me. Otherwise, it can't be alone.
I understand what you're saying. Sorrow is not completely what you mean, but a lot has to do with memory and time. And if we live every moment presently, then it's
Yes. Do I understand? Oh, there is the train again. Do I understand that sorrow is time and thought?
I don't know.
Wait. What was your question that, sorry?
As I understand it, I think that sorrow has something to do with memory of what has happened.
Yes,
And if we live every moment
that's right. If I could live every moment anew, afresh, there would be no sorrow, the questioner says. Because the questioner says, time, memory, breeds with self-pity, breeds sorrow. So how can one live so entirely in the present? Right, madam? Is that the question?
That's the question.
Yes.
Can you tell us something about consciousness and the real being?
Yes, sir.
Do you see
Sir,
any difference between them?
sir, I'm answering that question up first. I don't know if you heard that question. How am I to live being relationship. How am I to live so completely and wholly in the present? What does that mean? It's to live in the present. The present being disassociated with the future and the past. Otherwise, not the present. Disassociated from the yesterday and the tomorrow. So that I live without the burden of memory, which, with its self-pity, anxiety, breeds sorrow. Now, is it possible to live that way? Knowing I have to go to the office and work, implying whole series of activities which demand memory. And there is the family, the husband, the wife, the children. To live with memory, which is the office, the factory, the business of living, part of it, and all the particular memories of hurt and flattery and resentment. To be without all that and live completely in the present, being aware wholly the responsibility of memory, and where memory becomes the source of sorrow. To be so attentive of both. You understand? To be attentive of thought, where time, memory are absolutely essential, otherwise it can't function. And also to be aware, to be so attentive that past doesn't interfere with the present. Which means the mind is watching. Being aware of the delicacy of this movement. The harmony of this action and inaction. And that means only to look at what is without the yesterday. To look at what is without the memory of yesterday. What were you saying, sir? What was your question?
What is the difference between consciousness and the real being? Or can you tell us something about consciousness and the real being?
I really don't know. I don't know what you mean by consciousness and the real being. Is the real being not conscious at all? And if you're conscious, the real being is not? Is there a division between consciousness, to be conscious, and the state of the real being, are they two different? Or there is this mind that says, giving attributes, qualities to consciousness and to the real being. I wonder why we are bothered about this. Is this a speculative question or a real question? If it is a real question, which is a question that must be answered because it concerns living, then what is consciousness which is not being? Surely both have one on there. To be conscious. When am I conscious? That becomes too difficult. Let me put it very briefly. When is one conscious? There is that state when there is friction, struggle, pain, and pleasure. Conscious. I am conscious that you are there when you resist, when you fight, when you are questioning my doubt, my beliefs, and so on. And is there any other state in which I am not conscious, which is when there is no friction at all? And would I call that consciousness? That is, we are using the word consciousness to the whole structure and nature of conflict, struggle, ambition, competition, comparison, evaluation, and all that. That is to be conscious of my pain, my anxiety. And when that is not, am I asleep? When there is no battle. Am I asleep? Or I'm partially awake. And being partially awake, inattentive, I do all kinds of mischievous things, which brings again friction, and therefore I become more and more conscious through my inattention. And what is it to be so completely attentive, both to the conflict and to the state when there is inaction, when there is inattention? Is there such state? To be alive to the whole struggle, and also to be alive, alert, watchful of inattention. Both demand a certain quality of consciousness, alertness. And is there a state of mind which doesn't belong to either? That you have to find out. Buonasera.